Hello everyone and welcome to Project Insights Project Management webinar. The topic for today is part 2 of improving quality using Six Sigma concepts. Just a few things to note before we get started. All participants will be put on mute. However, any questions you have are more than welcome. Please go ahead and type those into your question box, which you can find on your GoToWebinar dashboard. We try to get through all your questions during the session, but if we can't, we'll make sure to get to you through email before the end of the day. Also, please note the webinar recording and slides will be available within our Project Insight community, and I will also send those to you through email by tomorrow. All of our PM trainings are valid for 1 PDU free of charge. However, you must be in attendance for the full session. I will email you your PDU certificate by the end of today, so please hold off on emailing me about your certificate until then. And for all other PDU information, please visit our PI community. Type in PDU in the search and you will find the PMI rules in an article called Webinars and PDUs. My name is Denise, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm on the marketing team here at Project Insight. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, please feel free to reach me at denise.rodriguez@projectinsight.com. And for those of you that are not familiar with Project Insight, we're a cloud-based project management solution. We work with two kinds of companies, those that are rapidly growing and need to scale the way they are managing their projects, and those who want greater visibility across their project portfolio, want more insight into the workloads of the resources, and want a better way to collaborate on projects among team members. If any of these sound familiar to you and you would like to learn more, please feel free to contact us via phone, email, or you can request your demo at projectinsight.net. I'd like to give a warm welcome to our presenter today, Diane Buckley. Diane is the CEO of Core Performance Concepts. CPC helps companies by training team members in project management, PMP preparation, leadership, business analysis. Diane has an MBA and a PMP and over 30 years of experience in the PM industry. I know most of you are very familiar with Diane. Good morning, Diane. How are you doing?
I am great. How are you guys doing? Welcome to the session today, guys. And gal.
I'm doing wonderful, and I hope our audience is ready to learn.
Well, we got, 350 people or so on, so we should be good to go here, right? All right, so I'm going to take control here. And I had to chuckle last month, or 2 weeks ago when we started this session. I didn't even realize that the picture that we had here was at the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So one of the audience goes, so is there any correlation between the conversation about quality and the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Didn't even think about that. So yeah, that's probably a quality conversation right there. How well did we build this building or plan to build this building? So just thought that was kind of funny to get started with. Oops. All right, so where we left it last time in our session is we talked about Lean and Six Sigma and what that actually means. And as project managers, and I know the majority of our audience is project managers, we do have a lot of business analysts. The concepts of Lean Six Sigma are things that you can apply throughout your day, throughout your career. It's not something that we have to, consciously have a special Lean Six Sigma project, but it's concepts that you should be thinking about all the time. And if we take this into consideration when we're working on our projects or working in our family, there are things that we can apply throughout our lives. And really the whole goal of Lean Six Sigma is to deliver quality products the first time and every time. And if we take that into consideration, we have to be somewhat reflective and think about what goes wrong all the time. And there was certainly not a lack of comments 2 weeks ago on areas that we see problems in our organization and places that get us frustrated. And what I'm going to try to do in today's session is tackle some of those questions, go a little bit deeper dive, give you some basic examples to have a conversation here today. And I am totally open to questions and comments, and Denise will be monitoring this while we're going along. And Denise, feel free to interrupt if you see something good come across. And if you see something bad come across too, that's fine too, but all comments are good. So what we want to try to do is, I'm not going to teach you all of the tools of Six Sigma or Lean, but we're going to talk about some of them. And the things that I find are extremely useful in my everyday activities, whether it's at home or at work. So the goal today is to give you some things to think about that you can really deliver on this principle, which is delivering quality products the first time and every time. So we'll start with the definition of quality. And the definition of quality is basically the ability of your products or services to conform to your customers' needs and wants. We discussed this before, where when you think about from a project management standpoint, the project quality is dependent on your project team delivering to the requirements of the project, no more and no less. So when we define the scope of the project, that is the definition of quality. And we need to make sure that we're delivering to that scope. If we regularly choose to circumvent or slim down on scope or give a little extra because, this client's nice, we are putting ourselves at risk to delivering a quality product. Because every time you take something away, you trim down scope, you're not delivering. That's the obvious one. We're not delivering to the scope, so then therefore we haven't delivered to the quality. And if we add things to it, what I find is every time we try to add something to it, although the intention is well, we potentially open ourselves up for breaking something else. And then that causes us to delay, not deliver on the scope, etc. We have to stay laser focused on making sure that we define the quality of our product through the use of our scope statement, and we deliver to what that customer has defined as their needs and their wants. So here's some comments from you guys over the last couple weeks, which we want to kind of talk through. These are exact comments from the audience. People make errors, and not having a way to point out the error to the user. Now, I read that and I said, okay, why? Why are we not able to point out the error to the user? When we work on projects and we don't turn around and provide feedback on the impact of an error, we are doing our project a disservice for the future. PMI promotes us having lessons learned. Those lessons learned to be communicated, through various mechanisms to the client, to the team, to executives, etc. We have to have a process and a mechanism to provide for feedback. If we don't provide for that feedback, what do you think is going to happen? Let's have a little interaction here with everybody. If we don't provide for feedback, what's going to happen in our project, the future project? If you go to your questions tab on you can put some comments in there. What happens if we don't provide for that feedback? Yeah, absolutely. The first one is repeatable errors, confusion, and failures. It's what I call that roller coaster of just a bad cycle. So we have to think about getting that communication back? And how many times do you think we have to do that communication? Let's also get your feedback on that. How often should we provide feedback? You know, we found some errors. We communicated back some of the errors that happened. Maybe have a discussion about root cause. How often do you think we have to go back on that and talk about that? Yeah, you got it, guys. Continuously. What we know is, you know, in research and everything else, we as people do not remember what was discussed. We may hear only a portion of what was discussed. We may not be able to totally link the error to what I personally did that made that error happen. So it is continuous. It's something we have to do all the time. I'll give you an example is, you know, to change behavior, you have to say that you're going to commit to something and really commit to it for several weeks. You know, I've heard anywhere from 2 weeks to 21 days or 25 days or something like that that says for people to change their habits, they have to commit to it. And if you don't realize or you don't recognize that your habits are causing errors, you're going to do the same thing over and over and over. So it's a huge issue for quality. We have to find ways to get off that roller coaster, and what I call it. The next bullet here talks about mostly quality issues are due to human error, execution of the process. You know, where do we see challenges in execution of a process? Some of the most common ones I see are we may not even have defined the process well. You know, I regularly ask people that I've been consulting with, I said, okay, well, you know, do you understand what the process is? Do you have a project management process that you follow and you follow religiously? Do the people that are responsible for delivering on that process, do they really know what it is that they're expected to do? What are the expectations? So if we're executing on the process consistently, then you can look at whether or not the process is broken. But if we're not even executing on the process consistently, then you're right. It is a lot of human error. And going back to the comment before, you know, processes should be documented. Processes should be agreed upon. And processes then need to be reinforced. So it really comes down to how well are you educating, training, reinforcing the process with your team. And the last comment here that came from the audience a couple weeks ago is, I believe you can have good quality projects but produce a bad quality deliverable. All right, so let's carry forward into that whole conversation of I've got a great project management process, which means that we put a charter together, we looked at our risks, we put a nice schedule together, we're tracking to the schedule, and we deliver the project on time, but the quality of the product didn't deliver. And that part can absolutely happen if you're not looking at product quality as well as project quality. So when we put together our scope statements, we should be looking at it from the perspective of product quality, which is the features and functionality that are needed to meet those customer needs, as well as project quality. If there's a timeline that we have to deliver it to or a budget we have to stay within, you know, that's project quality. So we have lots of human issues with our project, our quality. And if I can get this, there we go. The last one that came up with regard to just overall quality discussions was having tension between formal documented requirements and customer desires or preferences, the results are often the change control process is made so painful that the customer accepts suboptimal, albeit conforming deliverables. I like this one because it was like the person was just trying to share in their life, or the PM risks project failure trying to meet creeping requirements. So the way I read this one, and many of you probably can relate, is, nobody wants to go through a real detailed requirement session. It's a painful process, but it is necessary, and we have to do that in order for us to make sure we're articulating and documenting what the customer needs are. And the customer needs to commit to it too, because they may not understand the impact of their actions if they don't commit this time. I consistently see, customers that struggle with trying to articulate their requirements early on in a project. And then those companies that are good at managing changes end up getting the additional dollars and hours for those changes, but at the risk of frustrating the client. And sometimes you can have that discussion up front with the customer and basically understand what their experiences have been and gain commitment on having a much stronger requirements gathering process in order to help ensure the delivery. Now, unfortunately, that means that the person or persons on the other side have had that kind of experience, and many of them haven't. So, or their expectations are too high. So it really is. If I go back to the last slide, there's a lot of people issues. There's process and people issues, and then there's also perception issues and expectation issues that impact the quality of our project. Any comments or questions, Denise?
Let's see. Nope. We have a lot of comments from earlier, but guys, we welcome your questions.
All right. Well, we are going to talk about more in detail here, and one of the things, just to kind of close the comment here on this particular statement from our audience, is ask yourself this: are we taking shortcuts in a strong process that are causing us issues in delivery that we're not communicating back to the teams to see a long-term improvement? So think about that again. Are we taking shortcuts in our projects that are causing quality issues and not getting back to the people that are delivering the project so we can resolve the issues in the long run? That's what we're talking about here, guys. We seem to be on this roller coaster that doesn't seem to stop. And we, as project leaders, are the ones that have the details to be able to communicate that impact. And that's what we're going to talk about. How do we take the details? How do we communicate back to the project teams, to the customers, and help move their perception along to build a better relationship and deliver better quality? It is a process into itself. So what I want to do is regroup or review the principles of Lean, and just to remind you guys that Lean is basically how do we eliminate waste, and Six Sigma is how we eliminate defects. We're going to talk a bit more about Lean right now. And there were basically 4 goals of a Lean enterprise that we've talked about. 1 is improving quality. 2 is eliminating waste. 3 3 is reducing the lead time. And then 4, which is an awesome goal, is reducing overall total cost. So these are the 4 goals of a lean enterprise, and it all is focused on where do we find waste. So I had some fun with some of the comments from you guys again. I love this one, and it reminds, first one here, and it reminds me of another story. Somebody from the audience said, there's situations in hospitals where the wrong patient is registered and checked into the hospital. Well, 2 other scenarios that I've recently, experienced. I have a friend of mine that actually, his mother passed away, and the undertaker put the wrong Social Security number on the death certificate, which was his. So he was technically dead. And you talk about, it was so funny because it was funny from the perspective that within 2 weeks, everything was shut down. His driver's license was shut down. His Medicare payments were shut down. His Social Security stuff was, it was like everything shut down. And I was laughing because I'm like, oh, well, I guess our government worked, right? I was laughing. But, the hard part is that they can't fix anything for within, for less than 2 weeks. So it's going to be like 5, 6, 8 weeks before everything resolves itself. And those kinds of things are you talk about waste of time and energy for somebody making a silly mistake. The other one that was a situation, a friend of mine that I remember when we talked about this particular hospital one, is he had some kidney stones. So ended up in the hospital because he had kidney stones. And his wife was there with him, and the doctors checking him out and everything else said, oh, and by the way, your appendix is enlarged and it's about ready to burst. So we're going to fix the kidney stone stuff, but we're also going to put you in the hospital and do your appendix. And they're like, okay, right? And so they're getting ready to wheel him into surgery. And you know how you have all the little bracelets and everything else with the, being in the hospital. And all of a sudden the nurse looks at his wrist and looks at him, looks down at the wrist, looks at him, and she goes, you are a man, aren't you? And my girlfriend, Deborah, you should have seen the look on her face, was like, what? Well, somebody put the wrong wristband. They put a woman's, a female, I guess there's color coding, wristband on him. I mean, you talk about a silly mistake, but there could have been huge ramifications to that if you do things like that. So when we have, quality issues, we're trying to remove the obvious things that should never happen. So all 3 of those scenarios, this thing where the wrong patient gets registered, or they put the wrong wristband on, or somebody gets marked as dead and they're totally alive. Those are big items and huge impact to a hospital or an individual or things like that. And those are things you want to kind of eliminate. The other thing here is one of our audience talked about lots of issues and problems coming into the help desk after we go live. And the software was missing many required capabilities after we deployed. Now, all these stories are great, but what's missing is the impact and that feedback. Everybody can certainly easily find something wrong to complain about. I mean, we all can, right? But who takes the time to quantify the impact of these errors and then gain commitment on reducing them or eliminating them? So if we go to the next slide here, this is a tool that you guys should all be aware of, especially all of our PMTs. This is a Pareto diagram, right? And basically, a Pareto diagram is something that identifies various defects. In this particular case, it's defects based on how often they happen, and then we rank them and on how often they happen. You can also do something similar with regard to impacts, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but let's just talk about quantity. So in this particular case, we're talking about number of defects in painting. You know, so somebody comes and paints a house and everything else. What are the problems that we see with painting? And by and large, getting dirt in the paint causes that paint to peel sooner than it should, which then opens up the house to the elements and things like that and causes other damage, right? So that happens 58% of the time in this particular example. Well, there's also these other things, sagging of the paint, orange peel, thin paint, you know, sealer, under sealing, scratches that happen as part of the process, slightly being off color because you're using multiple gallons of paint. But which one should we really work on? We should obviously work on the dirt in the paint. How can we eliminate dirt in the paint? Because that's gonna reduce the number of defects for this particular scenario of painting a house. And we should, and that's in theory then reduces cost, correct? So if I just sit here and say that we have issues with our painting and we never come back and we never provide data, how do we know what we're working on and what our goal is? So I challenge each of you is when you hear things, especially in the case with the second bullet here, where lots of issues and problems coming into the help desk when we went live. The software was missing many required capabilities after deployed and went live. So what are some of the things we could be documenting in our support team, graphically presenting it, and showing the frequency? You know, so maybe it's what are the type of problems, right? Where do we think it was due to a missed requirement, or maybe it was an additional requirement, or let's document those things, let's quantify them. I guarantee you, if you're in a help desk environment, you've got data. Take the time to put the data together, create a graphic like this, and share that with the people that are responsible for improving the process. Any questions, Denise?
Yes, a couple questions. Let's see here. What is the best way to handle creeping requirements?
Best way to handle creeping requirements. Okay. On creeping requirements, remember how I said it's perception and how we set the stage early on? We have to make sure we start our project with an expectation, and the customer knows what's going to happen if we have creeping requirements, if we have additional requirements. You've got to get the commitment of the client to go through that requirements process and gain an agreement on what those requirements are. And once you do that, then you can manage your requirements stronger. If you haven't done those first two steps, it's really hard to manage. You've got to make sure that the customer understands what's going to happen if they put things into the mix after. And you also have to make sure that we're spending the right amount of time getting those requirements together. And that's a challenge too, because you've got to try different ways to communicate the end result to gain their acceptance on it. So that's a really hard thing to do, but you have to set the expectation. Anything else, Denise?
One more question before we move on. How do we define critical to quality parameters?
All right. Well, we're going to hit that one a little bit when we talk about acceptance criteria. So I'm going to hold on to that one, and hopefully we'll answer that question as we get there. Okay? Awesome. Another scenario that you guys provided was the concern about passing the buck. And basically, it has something that has to be attended to again. So I look at this as, if I'm reading it correctly, if there's a process and each person in that process is not fulfilling their obligation fully, we're passing the buck to the next group to potentially test it and check it out and verify. So I should have put this graphic in there. There is a significantly higher cost to fixing an issue when it goes into production or it goes to the customer than it is if we fix it at the point that it occurred. So when we talk about passing the buck, we're talking about everybody in the process has to fulfill their obligation and do their job. If we don't define and articulate and gain agreement on what that job is, you will continually have those issues. Some examples would be, let's just say we're making a change into the code, or and I'll do a technology example. And it's a simple one line of code. And the technical person, the developer, there should be, he or she should be testing that line of code when they're done. And let's say they don't. Well, it goes on to the QA department, and the QA department has maybe 10 test cases. And what they do is they basically run through their 10 test cases, and all 10 of them fail. So now they pop it back to the developer, and the developer has to fix it. Now, that is, you talk about waste, that is absolute waste, because you have time it took for that developer to handle it to QA. There is going to be a lag time, because one of the waste items is delayed, right? Just wait time is the delay. So you've got potentially days before the QA person touches it, and then the QA person goes through all of the test cases, and that's a waste of time because none of them worked. And it then gets kicked back, and now the developer is spending more time. So the number of times we go back and forth is a huge drain on our resources and our costs. So everybody needs to be doing their job. Now, going back to what should have happened, in my experience, and your experience might be a little bit different, in my experience, that developer should have a set of basic test cases. Either that person created them or were provided to them to ensure that it at least passes a certain level of quality before it gets handed off to the QA team. Now, the QA team probably has and should have a much more comprehensive set of test cases to validate that all different scenarios are working thoroughly. So I don't expect the developer to test all 10 test cases, but that developer should have tested at least the 2 or 3 critical ones before ever handing it to the QA person. So when I saw this comment here, it absolutely, when that kind of stuff happens, it does remove predictability, because we have no confidence that when we hand the work off to the next step, that it will be there successfully. And that's because we don't take seriously, and I'm saying that negatively, we don't take seriously what our role is and the impact to the person downstream and what the overall total cost of that is. And the more you can bring that to the forefront and demonstrate that cost, the better you'll gain acceptance from the and commitment from the people that are early in the process. We all need to understand what our actions do to the cost of the project. And when we just pass the buck and say, oh, I don't have time. Yes, go for it.
All right. If the highest defects are the most costly to correct, do you gain anything by solving/eliminating less costly problems until you can gain approval to correct the more costly errors?
You know, there absolutely could be, and probably if we go back to the conversation about the hospitals and the death certificate, those are probably not the most voluminous errors we see, but they're probably high-cost errors, and they might have simple fixes. So we use that Pareto diagram to, I'll go back there. We use a Pareto. This particular one talks about volume, and it might be a high dollar amount to fix that certain paint, but to fix it, but maybe scratching, you know, the scratch is an easy thing to fix that doesn't take a lot, but it's still lower volume, and maybe it has a big impact or a similar impact. The Pareto diagram is meant to prioritize. So using Pareto to find the most volume defects is one approach, one tool you can use. Another option would be looking at the impact and doing an impact analysis on certain defects. And you might choose to work on the ones that are the highest impact. And we don't know what the cost is for each of them yet to fix it. And your point is, does it have any benefit? Of course, it has benefit. If you're fixing and resolving and eliminating a defect or waste, then there is definite benefit. But you have to look at your return on investment. So if the scratch only happens 2 times, but it's going to cost us, $10,000 to do it, and it only happens 2 times a year, well, your return on investment may not be there. So you got to take that into consideration too. Should you spend the $10,000 to eliminate that, or is it okay? And that's a decision you have to make. Very good question. Anything else?
Let's see. Is there an easy way to capture how the cost on the non-quality increases as the process continues?
Say that one more time.
Is there an easy way to capture how the cost on non-quality increases as the process continues?
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that a little bit. Actually, I want to see show of hands. And who works in an organization? So go to your little attendee list and you can raise your hand here. Who works in an organization that has a group that is responsible for business process? I mean, it probably is going to be called the business process group. It's probably going to be process improvement group. I mean, somebody that drives business process. You probably see it in manufacturing firms. You might see it in healthcare organizations. People that have individuals that are totally responsible for managing process. Okay, very few of you, but a few hands. Okay, so one of the benefits of having that kind of organization in place is they know how much time it takes to deliver a product. They know. They know for every single step, my time studies have been done that it takes, I can process 10 widgets per hour on step 1. I can process 5 widgets per hour on step 2, so that means step 2 needs 2 people. So how do you keep the whole process moving forward? So if you don't, the question had to do with the cost. you need to be able to do some time studies with regard to what it takes and how much time is spent. And I'll give you one example that I recently worked on. Is there was a project that, and I'll just use some round numbers. You know, the project was delivered on time. The project manager and the business analyst time spent on the initial development with the engineers was reasonable, but we had a significant number of defects, and it kind of goes back to my conversation about the testing. A significant number of defects where the amount of time spent on the defects was equivalent to what was spent on the overall project for the first time through. So it was a 2-for-1. I mean, they doubled the cost. So if they just spent, 10 hours putting together more detailed acceptance criteria, we could have saved 90 hours worth of work. Because the ultimate root cause was we didn't develop correctly to the requirements because nobody was really testing to it. So it was a huge change. So you have to do some sort of time study to be able to get that. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And I know we're running low on time here, so I'm going to have to speed it up here. So to kind of summarize where we want to look at is, I love this chart. It's basically, the source of it was probably originally Steve Covey. And, we got to talk about where are we spending our time. And this green box here that says important goals. If you think about your project schedule, every task on your project schedule that you set out, including your critical path, these are important but not urgent items. They're important items that need to be worked, and you're scheduling them, and you're planning, and you're moving forward with, and you're checking off the box. All right? Every once in a while, not always, things go into crisis mode, and this is where you have very important items that became critical and urgent. So you need to address them. But we shouldn't have many in there. That should be few and far between. But I find that a lot of people tend to work in this area, and we need to get out of that. You want to be working in your important goals, working your schedule, making sure everybody's delivering to that schedule, and everything kind of stays tracking well. Now, you got the things called distractions. These are non-important things, non-urgent things. So if they're not important and they're not urgent, why the heck are we working on them? But a lot of times people have these little distractions and they're not realizing how much time they're wasting on these distractions. So we want to kind of get rid of those and stay focused on the important goal. And the last box here is interruption. These are non-important things that somebody says are urgent. And I use Skype a lot, and I see a lot of people using Skype for those kinds of things. Hey, can you look at this real quick? Well, you know what? I might be working on my really important goal today. And what you're asking me to look at real quick isn't necessarily important today. And we let that drive our day. So I find a lot of people spend their time in distractions and interruptions and don't focus on the important goals. And this is when we do that and we don't focus on the important goals, those important goals become critical items. So how do we break that? How do we get past that? And it does require some sort of time study. Look at it, document it. Have your team talk about what are the real important things you're doing, and then plot it. Take a week and just see how much time are you spending on each of those boxes. It'll be a real eye-opening activity for you. And to kind of bring this point home too is we need to make sure that we give ourselves a target to shoot at. So if we talk about, the important goals, that's your target. You know, what are the things we want to accomplish? And that's what your customers want. You know, they do have a thought, they do know what they don't want. And sometimes they're having a hard time defining what they do want. But it is very important to document what those goals are. And this is where I'm going to bring up the conversation of acceptance criteria. I won't bore you guys with reading through this, but I put an example out here, and you guys can look at it later. You know, we've got to have a very measurable, a SMART requirement. We've got to take the time. You know, putting a requirement that says reduce number of phone calls and that's it isn't a requirement. What is our goal? What are we trying to do? You know, we want to reduce the number of phone calls made to customers by 50%. That's more of a requirement. And we have something to shoot for, some target to shoot for. And then we got to put together some acceptance criteria. You know, how are we going to get there? What are some ideas, and how do we make sure we get there? And you know, you can read through this on your own, but you know, one of the ideas is, you know, maybe train a mailroom, because we know that a person downstream is a more expensive resource than the person upstream, right? In this particular scenario, the mailroom person is, you know, is assumed to be a lesser cost than the downstream person of a compliance person. And if there's some things we can stop and eliminate from the more expensive person's day and give it to a lesser expensive person, then we're addressing some of the cost issues. And if we're trying to reduce the number of phone calls made by the compliance reviewers, because those phone calls take time, then that's an option. Another thing is, you know what, maybe eliminate phone calls. You know, what are some of those ideas? But if you notice, they're very specific. There's dollars associated to things. We've thought through percentages, quantity. You know, if you can get your clients to articulate acceptance criteria, then you can potentially solve the problem we're talking about earlier on how do we stop toe creep? How do we gain commitment? This stuff takes time, guys. And if we don't take the time to really articulate it and get it clear, you will have issues downstream. You're going to have conversations on change requests. I was literally on the phone today with somebody today, and there was an issue with a change that was made, and we kind of have to back it out, but the customer's not really asking for it, and she wanted to know, should we back it out or not? And I said, and again, taking everything into consideration, I said, you know, we could ask the client, but we know this client, and this client, we will end up spending 10 hours discussing whether or not we should back it out or not, when it's probably only going to take an hour to back it out. So what would you rather do? You want to spend 10 hours with the customer trying to determine whether or not they're okay with backing out, or do we just tell the customer, we're going to back it out. If you have any problem with it, let us know, but otherwise we're just going to do that. It's going to be 1 hour. We don't even have to charge the customer. You know, so sometimes we cause ourselves more turmoil without taking into consideration all of the costs. And I want you guys to really start thinking about the overall total cost of our project and our action. And the more time we spend up front putting our requirements together and getting that acceptance criteria together, the better we will be in the long run. This question came up last time, 2 weeks ago, and I answered it then, and I felt it was important to bring it up and answer it again. Because I know a lot of you are working in agile environments, and for those of you that might not have been here 2 weeks ago, the question was, how does lean work in conjunction with agile? With agile, requirements evolve throughout the project, so understanding requirements at the onset may be a challenge. My response to this was, you still have requirements, and you still need acceptance criteria. So even though you're working from a pool of requirements, The requirements that float to the top of the backlog are requirements that need to have acceptance criteria. And you need to take the time to do that. And know when, or know when the customer will agree that it is done. And if you can articulate that well, then you can utilize take these concepts in an agile environment or not. How do you determine which backlog items to work on? Maybe you should have a Pareto diagram for each of those backlog items. How do they fit within the overall set of defects that we're trying to address? Should that be part of your criteria for prioritization? And then to summarize, when we talk about lean, we're talking about waste. So, every time we see where we're overproducing something, meaning we have too much, we're making too much, or we're giving too much extra and not managing to the scope, that's waste. If we're waiting for something, that whole conversation about the developer sending it over to QA and QA is sitting there waiting for it. In an ideal world, the developer completes it and there's a QA person ready to go as soon as the developer's done with it and tested it. Waiting time is wasteful because from the client's perspective, it's impacting or potentially impacting the delivery date if we were waiting on anything. Transport, it's similar to waiting. If I've got to move it in a truck, there's some waste there. In an ideal world, you've got the Star Trek transporter where everything just automatically appears, right? Some transportation is not avoidable, but there are certain environments where you have options on how to transport things. Extra processing, similar to overproduction where, doing above and beyond the expected quality of the project. Inventory, holding inventory is wasteful. You've got storage location, you've got, air conditioning, and just having an extra storage location is wasteful. How many people have a storage unit? I'm one of those, but at one point in time I had 3 storage units because I was getting married and we were consolidating houses. I had 3 storage units, and it was driving me nuts. We were spending like $500 a month on storage, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. I could buy this stuff all over again rather than, for the amount that we're spending on storage units. So inventory is very wasteful. If it's something that's not replaceable, then okay, then you have to kind of figure out, okay, for me to replace this, it's going to be, I'll use an example of my husband has a whole lot of tools. So we have one small storage unit here, and he has a lot of tools in there. And to replace all those tools would be thousands and thousands of dollars. So for the cost of, $200 a year, okay, fine. Our break even, our return on investment will be, 20 years from now, and I can accept that. So, you have to kind of think about that. But the other stuff, when we were just storing Christmas stuff for 3 years in a large unit, that was like, I could throw all this Christmas stuff out and buy new every single year for less than the cost of the storage unit. And then motion, we're going to talk about motion here in a second, and then we've talked a bit about defects. So some of the questions, motion, you guys provided me a few examples of motion and about traveling, to a customer site for a 1-hour meeting. Yes, it can be a waste of time. You've got to think about the intangibles, though. There could be some definite intangible benefits, but if you look at it just very black and white, yeah, I can agree with you. Here's a little conversation about moving stuff to a storage facility, then moving it from the storage to your home. Depending on timing, yes, that could be wasteful, but again, you have to look at it from a situational standpoint. And waste does occur due to a lack of strategy development prior to project inception. So if you think about the thought process, remember when we started this webinar, think about the thought process. How are you making decisions? Are you looking at the dollars and cents? Are you looking at where things are sitting? Is what I'm doing falling into this 7 types of waste? And if you do that, if you have that mindset, you're going to start making different decisions. And the last little piece here, and I'm just about done, and I'm going to be right under the wire here, is we talked a bit about flowcharts. And I think flowcharts are excellent tools to document the process and see where there's potential waste. Having things go back and forth to different departments is wasteful. You've got to look at what is the cost of each resource, what are the materials of the resources that the material costs that you need for each of the steps. Where do people add value? Or is it just busy work that somebody is just kind of taking it and passing it down? Is that step absolutely necessary? So I challenge you to look at your process, including your project management process, guys, and look at utilizing some sort of activity cost worksheet that gets you to articulate in dollars and cents what the true cost is. So as an example here, if we want to look at number of paychecks produced, there is a certain output, could be 10 paychecks per hour. There's a certain cost, maybe it's $35 an hour. And so basically I'm saying for $35 an hour I can do 10 paychecks. If I'm only doing 10 paychecks in a week, it may not make sense to automate. But if I'm doing 4,000 paychecks in a week, the return on investment on that development effort could be huge. So it makes sense to take your time and put the dollars and cents together. Don't just wing it and say, oh, we really need to automate the payroll process. But like I said, if you're processing 10 per week, does it really make sense? But if I'm processing 4,000 per week, I think I can potentially put a justification together to say that makes sense. If it's going to cost me $1,000 to do the development, and I can save 4,000 times 35, or 4,000 divided by 10, which would be 400 times 35, you're talking thousands of dollars every single week. So for a $1,000 investment, my return on investment is like a week. So I need you guys, you must do this, you must. Think about the dollars and cents, and that's where Six Sigma comes in, Six Sigma and Lean. It's a discipline about putting the details and the dollars on paper to gain acceptance and to gain commitment to change. People don't change if they don't believe that the change is going to help anything. You may believe it, but if you haven't articulated that to the people that need to change, you're not going to see the results you want. So the only way we improve quality is by taking the time to document and put in dollars and cents the impact and communicate back to the people that have to change how that impact affects the bottom line. So you have to define your key metrics. You have to quantify your current environment. You need to focus on waste that affects those key metrics. So the question with regard to, do I do the lesser defects versus the more important ones, that does depend on which are your key metrics. And don't do more than you can support. This is where I see another challenge for organizations. Everything sounds great, let's do it all. Well, we can't do it all. Find the biggest challenges. Six Sigma teaches us to get, and if you look at just the Pareto one, the big hitters. Hit the big hitters, get them taken care of. Once we get those taken care of, then we can look at the next level. So that's kind of where we are, guys. I appreciate the time. I absolutely am a proponent of you guys getting Six Sigma certified. I think there's a lot part of the Six Sigma certification that talks about managing projects. I think business analysts as well, because even if you're managing projects, you need people that understand how to quantify things within your organization. So project managers, business analysts, all can benefit from learning some of these Six Sigma tools. And one of our audience suggested a couple good books that you can read. The Goal or Critical Chain. Those are a couple of good ones that you can look at and kind of learn more. And so I encourage you to do that. And I'm going to hand it back to you, Ms. Denise. All right? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So very quick, guys, our next webinar is on positive conflict that invites team collaboration and sparks creativity. That's on Wednesday, September 14th. If you have not already registered for that, I encourage you to do so right after this webinar.
And Brenda's doing
and
that
Dan,
one.
Would
Everybody
you like
loves
to,
Brenda.
Yeah. Would you like to speak a little bit about this slide?
Sure. We have a business analysis prep course for the PMI PBA that's coming up in September. It's only $349, and it's 35 hours worth of coursework. And we do go over some of those tools. The business analysis certification does address some of the key tools that Six Sigma certification does too. So it's a nice complement to your portfolio of certification. So hope everybody can join us.
Awesome, thank you. And there's also a free or special promotion for those of you attending today. If you'd like to continue your project management skills, there is a 10% discount for online courses. So go ahead and check them out today. I have included that link in your chat box. And for PDUs, I will automatically send your PDU certificate towards the end of today. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to reach me at denise.rodriguez@projectinsight.com. You will earn 1 PDU per webinar attended. And to register your PDU, go to pmi.org and log in as a member of PMI. Select course or training and fill out all the information below, which will also be available in your PDU certificate. For those of you on social media, I'd like to invite you to follow, like, and subscribe to our social media channels. Our handle on Twitter is @ProjectInsight. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for the latest in PI news. And finally, in our Project Insight community, you'll find many recorded videos and webinars for you to watch and learn from. You can sign up for your next project management training, leadership, IT methodology, agile, product training. They are all free. Go ahead and check out our webinar calendar and register for as many as you'd like. And until then, we'd like to thank Diane for a great session. And of course, we'd like to thank our audience for your time. Thank you for hanging in there. I know we went a little bit over time, but no worries. That is it. That's all I have for you today.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great week.
Awesome. You too. Bye-bye.